The sharp, definitive rip of paper cut through the sterile hum of the airport terminal. It was a sound louder than any muffled boarding announcement, more arresting than the rumble of a 747 taking off. 2 pieces of a first-class boarding pass, bearing the name Jordan Banks, fluttered to the polished linoleum floor like severed wings. A middle-aged boarding agent, her face a mask of smug satisfaction, stood over them. A young black man, barely 18, watched them fall, his calm expression betraying none of the fury and humiliation roiling inside him. He was just a kid in a hoodie. To her, he was a problem to be eliminated. What she couldn't possibly know was that she hadn't just torn a ticket. She had torn up her entire life. The air in St. Augustine International Airport's Terminal C was a familiar cocktail of jet fuel Cinnabon and low-grade anxiety. For Jordan Banks, it was also thick with the ghost of his grandfather. It had only been 3 months since Arthur Banks, a titan of the tech industry, and a man who saw the world in lines of code and untapped potential, had passed away. He had left behind a legacy that was as complex as it was vast, a sprawling empire of patents, properties, and audacious investments, and at the very heart of it, he had placed his 18-year-old grandson. Jordan felt the weight of that trust in the heft of the leather portfolio resting on his lap. Inside, past the laptop and the noise-cancelling headphones, were documents that could reshape industries. But looking at him, you wouldn't see a chairman of the board. You'd see a teenager. He wore a simple, unbranded charcoal hoodie, a soft, high-quality cashmere blend that felt like a hug paired with dark jeans and a pair of immaculate limited-edition sneakers. It was the uniform of a generation designed for comfort on a long-haul flight, not for display. His flight, Pinnacle Airlines flight 8115 to Zurich, was a pilgrimage of sorts. Arthur had acquired Pinnacle Airlines 6 months before his death, calling it his retirement project. He'd seen it as a broken, inefficient system, a puzzle of logistics and human experience that he was determined to solve. "You can't just move people, Jordan," he'd said, his voice raspy in those final weeks. "You have to move them with dignity. The moment they step into the airport, they are yours. Their journey is your responsibility." Jordan was flying to Zurich for his first official board meeting. He was traveling with his grandfather's longtime legal counsel, Samuel Finch, who was already waiting for him in the first-class lounge. Jordan, however, had wanted to walk the terminal to see the airline through a passenger's eyes, not from the sanitized bubble of a VIP suite. He wanted to feel the pulse of the place his grandfather had poured his last burst of energy into. He found gate C37 and settled into one of the stiff, uncomfortable chairs, pulling his headphones over his ears, but keeping the volume low. He watched the organized chaos, the river of humanity flowing around him, and he watched the gate agents. There were 2 of them. One was a young man, efficient and polite, his smiles seeming genuine. The other was a woman in her late 40s with tightly permed hair and a name tag that read Brenda. There was a sour, put-upon air about her. She handled each passport as if it were a contaminated object, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. She corrected a non-native English speaker with exaggerated slowness, her voice dripping with condescension. She barked at a family with young children to consolidate their carry-on bags. Jordan felt a knot of unease tighten in his stomach. This was the face of his company. This was the first point of contact, the human embodiment of the Pinnacle Airlines brand. And she was miserable and intent on making everyone around her miserable too. Arthur's words about dignity echoed in his mind. This was the opposite of dignity. This was a toll booth operated by a troll. He watched her for a full 20 minutes a silent observer cataloguing every sigh, every eye roll, every curt dismissal. He wasn't looking for trouble. He was simply trying to understand the puzzle his grandfather had left him. He didn't yet realize that trouble in the form of a woman named Brenda Scanlon had already been looking for him. The announcement crackled over the PA system. "We are now pleased to invite our first-class passengers to begin boarding Flight 815 to Zurich at Gate C37. Jordan stood, stretched his long limbs and slung his backpack over one shoulder. He slipped the simple, elegant first-class ticket from his jacket pocket. He was the fourth person in line. The young agent handled the first two passengers with a quick scan and a warm, "Enjoy your flight, sir." Then it was Brenda's turn. She took the ticket from the businessman in front of Jordan, her expression unchanging. Then Jordan stepped forward and handed her his boarding pass. Brenda's eyes flicked from the paper to his face, then down to his hoodie and sneakers, then back to his face. A flicker of something disbelief, suspicion, contempt crossed her features. She did not take the ticket. The first-class line, she said, her voice flat and loud enough for those nearby to hear, is for first-class passengers. Jordan blinked momentarily, confused. "Yes, I know," he said calmly, gesturing to the ticket still held in his hand. "That's me, Jordan Banks." Brenda finally took the ticket, snatching it from his fingers. She held it up to the light as if it were a $100 bill she suspected was counterfeit. The knot in Jordan's stomach tightened into a cold stone. He could feel the eyes of the other passengers on him. The silent, uncomfortable shuffle of people who know they are witnessing the start of something ugly. This was exactly the kind of rot his grandfather had wanted to eliminate, and now it was his responsibility. Brenda Scanlon held the boarding pass like it was evidence in a crime. Her eyes, magnified slightly by her reading glasses, scanned every letter, every barcode. She ran her thumb over the Zone 1 print, a gesture of profound skepticism. "Jordan Banks," she read aloud, drawing the name out, as if it tasted strange. She looked up at him again, her gaze sweeping over him with the subtlety of a searchlight. "This is a rather expensive ticket for someone your age." The implication hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Jordan kept his voice even, a skill his grandfather had drilled into him during mock negotiations and board meetings. "It was a gift," he said simply. It wasn't a lie. The entire airline was in a way a final gift. "A gift," Brenda repeated, a humorless smile touching her lips. "How lovely. And do you have identification to go with this gift?" "Of course." Jordan reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet, retrieving his brand-new driver's license. The photo was terrible, taken on a day his high school photo was scheduled, but the name was clear: Jordan A. Banks. Brenda took the ID and held it next to the ticket, comparing them with the intensity of a forensic analyst. The line behind Jordan was growing longer now, a restless murmur beginning to ripple through the waiting passengers. A man in a tailored suit sighed audibly. "Is there a problem?" Jordan asked, his patience beginning to fray at the edges. "I'm just doing my job," Brenda snapped, her voice sharp. "We have protocols to follow. It's unusual, you see. We get people trying it on all the time. They find a discarded ticket or buy a fake one online, thinking they can just waltz into first class." Each word was a carefully aimed dart designed to paint him as a fraud. He wasn't just a passenger, he was a suspect. The other passengers weren't just onlookers anymore. They were a jury. "Ma'am, I can assure you the ticket is real, and I am Jordan Banks," he said, his voice dropping slightly, trying to de-escalate, to pull the situation out of the public theatre she had created. But Brenda was on a roll. She seemed to draw energy from the confrontation, from the power she wielded in this small fiefdom of carpeted floor and plexiglass. "I'll be the judge of that," she said. She turned to her computer terminal, her fingers tapping on the keyboard with angry staccato clicks. She scanned his boarding pass. A green light blinked on her screen. Confirmation. Jordan expected that to be the end of it. He saw the green light. He saw the data appear on her screen, matching his name. His seat, 2A, a window seat his grandfather had always preferred. Brenda's face tightened. The computer had contradicted the narrative she had constructed in her head. For a moment, she was silent. Then she doubled down. "The system can be glitchy," she announced to no one in particular. She turned her attention back to Jordan. "Sometimes when a ticket is flagged as stolen or purchased with a fraudulent credit card, it can still show up as valid initially. I'll need to make a call." This was a blatant fabrication, a desperate move to save face and prolong her power trip. Jordan knew it. He had spent the last 2 months buried in Pinnacle's operational manuals and financial reports. He knew their ticketing system was state-of-the-art, a multi-million-dollar investment Arthur had personally overseen. A fraudulent flag would lock the ticket out instantly. "That won't be necessary," Jordan said, his voice now carrying a new edge of authority. "The ticket was purchased directly through the corporate office. There is no issue with the payment." His knowledge of the airline's inner workings seemed to momentarily throw her. But prejudice is a stubborn fortress. "Oh, the corporate office," she sneered, her voice thick with sarcasm. "And I suppose you're the CEO's son?" A few people in the line snickered. Jordan's cheeks burned. He could feel the situation slipping away, becoming a spectacle. He had wanted to observe, to learn. Instead, he was being dissected. "No," he said, meeting her gaze directly. "I'm not." "Right," Brenda scoffed. She picked up the handset of her desk phone, but she didn't dial. She held it as a prop. "Look, son, I don't have time for games. We have a full flight. It's clear you don't belong here. Why don't you just admit you found this ticket, and we can avoid a lot of unpleasantness. I might even be able to get you a seat at the back of the plane if you're cooperative." It was the offer of a plea bargain, delivered with the smug certainty of a prosecutor who believes they have an open and shut case. She wasn't just accusing him of fraud. She was offering him a demeaning path to redemption, a way for him to accept his place at the back of the bus, so to speak. The humiliation was a physical thing now, a hot pressure behind his eyes. He thought of his grandfather, of the lectures on dignity and responsibility. Arthur Banks had not raised him to shrink, to accept injustice for the sake of a quiet life. "I will not be admitting to something I didn't do," Jordan said, his voice low and steady, a quiet fire kindling within him. "And I will not be moving to the back of the plane. My seat is 2A. I would appreciate it if you would scan my valid ticket and let me board." He had drawn a line in the sand. Brenda looked at him, at this defiant young man in a simple hoodie, and her face hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She saw his refusal not as a defense of his rights, but as a personal attack on her authority. He had challenged her, and in her tiny kingdom by Gate C-37, such challenges could not go unpunished. Brenda Scanlon placed the phone receiver back in its cradle with a deliberate, noisy clack. The performance of making a call was over. Now it was time for the verdict, and sentencing to be held right there in the court of public opinion. "Okay, that's it. I've had enough of this," she declared, her voice rising in volume and pitch. She was no longer speaking just to Jordan, but to the entire gate area. She was recruiting the audience to her side. This young man is holding up the entire boarding process for everyone. He is presenting a ticket that is clearly not his, and refusing to cooperate. Heads turned. Phones which had been idly scrolling through social media were now subtly angled in their direction. Jordan was acutely aware of the lenses, the unseen eyes of the internet that could soon be watching this. "That's not true," Jordan stated, fighting to keep the tremor of anger out of his voice. "I've shown you my ticket and my ID. Your own system confirmed it's valid. You are the one holding up the line." "My system," Brenda scoffed, waving a dismissive hand, "is telling me one thing, but my 20 years of experience is telling me another. And I trust my experience. We have a profile to watch for, and you, sir, fit it perfectly." The word profile hung in the air, ugly and sharp. It was the quiet part said loud. It wasn't about the ticket anymore. It was about his skin color, his age, his clothes. It was about her preconceived notion of who deserved to turn left when they stepped onto an airplane. A woman in the line behind him, a middle-aged blonde with a kind face, spoke up hesitantly. "Excuse me." He showed you his ID. "What seems to be the problem?" Brenda swiveled her head, her eyes narrowing. "The problem, ma'am, is a security issue. I'd appreciate it if you'd let me handle it." "It doesn't seem like a security issue," the woman persisted gently. "It seems like you're harassing him." Brenda's face flushed a deep, mottled red. Being challenged by one of her own, a middle-aged white woman who should have been her natural ally in this scenario, was an intolerable offense. "I am the lead gate agent here." Brenda spat, her professional veneer cracking to reveal the raw hostility beneath. "I am responsible for the safety and security of this flight. And if I say there is a problem, there is a problem. Now, are you going to let me do my job, or do you want to be removed from this flight as well for interfering?" The woman recoiled, her face paling. Her husband put a restraining hand on her arm, shaking his head, and pulled her back. The brief moment of solidarity was crushed. The message was clear: do not interfere. The rest of the line fell silent, a mixture of fear and apathy and morbid curiosity on their faces. They just wanted to get on the plane. Jordan was an obstacle, a piece of turbulence, before they had even left the ground. Feeling her power re-established, Brenda turned the full force of her venom back on Jordan. "You've had your chance to walk away. I tried to be nice." "You have been anything but nice." Jordan countered his voice, a low, dangerous rumble. "You have been unprofessional, discriminatory, and insulting. Now, for the last time, are you going to let me board this aircraft?" He was no longer a shy teenager. In that moment, he was Arthur Banks's grandson, the inheritor of a business empire built on disruption and a refusal to accept a flawed status quo. He was channeling a lifetime of his grandfather's lessons on standing one's ground. His defiance was the final spark on the tinder. Brenda's face contorted with a rage that seemed to have been simmering for years, perhaps decades. It was the rage of someone who felt overlooked, underpaid, and disrespected by the world. And here was a perfect, undeserving target on which to unleash it all. "You're not getting on this plane," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You want to know what I think of your first-class ticket?" She picked the boarding pass off the counter. She held it up between her thumb and forefinger, right in front of his face. The Pinnacle Airlines logo. The bold letters of his name, the elegant print of Seat 2A, it was all there. "I think it's trash," she whispered, and then with a sharp, violent twist of her wrists, she tore it in two. "Rape!" The sound was shockingly intimate in the cavernous space of the terminal. It was a sound of finality, a point of no return. The two halves of the boarding pass, now just useless scraps of paper, fluttered from Brenda's fingers and landed on the floor at Jordan's feet. A collective gasp went through the line. The quiet murmuring ceased, replaced by a stunned, heavy silence. Even for a crowd, jaded by the everyday indignities of air travel. This was a shocking breach of conduct. An agent destroying a passenger's official travel document was unheard of. It was an act of pure, unadulterated malice. Jordan stared down at the two pieces of paper. One piece said Jord, the other Banks. It was as if she had symbolically torn his very identity apart. The heat of humiliation that had been building in his chest turned into an icy calm. The anger was still there, a white-hot core deep inside him, but it was now encased in a layer of cold, clear focus. Shouting would do no good. Arguing was pointless. She had escalated this beyond reason. Brenda watched him, a triumphant, ugly smirk on her face. She crossed her arms, waiting for the explosion. She expected him to yell, to curse, maybe even to lunge at the plexiglass barrier. She was ready for it. She would buzz security, and he would be hauled away in handcuffs, a perfect and satisfying end to her story. He would be the unhinged thug she had decided he was from the moment she first saw him. But Jordan did not explode. He slowly bent down, his movements deliberate, and picked up the two pieces of his ticket. He held them in his palm, looking at the ragged, torn edge where they were supposed to meet. He thought of his grandfather again, not of his lectures on business, but of the time Jordan had lost a chess match and thrown a piece across the room in frustration. Arthur hadn't yelled. He had simply said, "Anger is a fog, Jordan. It makes you blind. A smart man waits for the fog to clear before he makes his next move." The fog was clearing. Jordan straightened up and looked at Brenda. He didn't look at her with hatred. He looked at her with a kind of detached pity, the way a scientist might look at a specimen under a microscope just before a fatal experiment. "You are going to regret that," he said. His voice was not a threat. It was a simple statement of fact delivered with a chilling certainty that unnerved Brenda more than any shouted obscenity could have. Her smirk wavered for a fraction of a second. "Security," she barked, recovering her composure. She pressed a large red button under her console. "I need security at gate C37 immediately. We have a non-compliant individual causing a disturbance." She thought this was her checkmate. Jordan simply stood his ground, the two pieces of the ticket resting in his open palm. He could feel the stares of everyone, the weight of their judgment, their assumptions. They saw a young black man, a torn ticket, and a gate agent calling for security. They saw a story they thought they already knew. He ignored them all. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His thumb moved swiftly across the screen, finding a name in his contacts list. He pressed call. The phone rang once. "Mr. Finch," Jordan said, his voice perfectly level. "It's Jordan Banks." He paused, listening. Brenda watched her arms still crossed, a look of contemptuous amusement on her face. A phone call to his mummy, his lawyer. It was pathetic. "I'm at gate C37. Jordan continued, his eyes locked on Brenda's. "We have a problem with a Pinnacle Airlines employee. Her name is Brenda Scanlon." He glanced at her name tag to confirm. "Yes, Scanlon. She has just identified my ticket as fraudulent and has destroyed it. She has called for security. to have me removed." He listened again for a moment. A faint, tinny voice could be heard from the phone's earpiece. "Yes, sir. I think it would be best if you came down, and perhaps you could make a call to Ms. Dubois as well. Let her know what's happening on her watch." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Brenda let out a short, derisive laugh. "Mr. Finch, Miss Dubois. You're dropping names now. That's really sad. You're in a world of trouble, kid. You have no idea." "No," Jordan said, his voice quiet, but carrying in the silent terminal. He held up the 2 pieces of the ticket. "You have no idea." In the distance, the purposeful heavy tread of security boots could be heard approaching, getting closer and closer. Brenda's smirk returned wider and more confident than ever. Her moment of victory was at hand. The cavalry was coming. The sound of approaching security personnel shifted the atmosphere at the gate from tense drama to imminent crisis. 2 uniformed airport security officers appeared first, their faces impassive, their hands resting near their belts. They were followed by a man in a sharply tailored dark suit. He was older with graying temples and a face that was accustomed to authority. He moved with a swift, no-nonsense stride that parted the crowd of onlookers like a ship's bow through water. This was not a man who responded to routine disturbances. This was a man who solved problems. Brenda Scanlon's posture straightened. She puffed out her chest, ready to deliver her report, to be the calm, professional victim of this unfortunate but necessary incident. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Jordan. "That's him," she announced to the man in the suit. "Frank Miller, head of airport security. Thank you for the prompt response. This individual attempted to board using a fraudulent first-class ticket. When I challenged him, he became belligerent and refused to leave. He was causing a major disturbance." She delivered the lines with practiced ease. It was her word, the word of a 20-year veteran employee against a kid in a hoodie. Frank Miller's eyes, a sharp, piercing blue, swept the scene. He glanced at the torn ticket in Jordan's hand. He glanced at Jordan's calm, unwavering expression. He glanced at Brenda's flushed, triumphant face. And he glanced at the anxious, curious faces of the other passengers. He took it all in a matter of seconds. Then, just as he was about to speak, another figure arrived. An older gentleman, impeccably dressed in a classic tweed jacket, with a silver-topped cane in his hand, though he barely seemed to need it. He radiated an aura of quiet, unshakable gravitas. It was Samuel Finch, chief legal counsel for the Banks Corporation for over 40 years, and the executor of Arthur Banks's estate. Mr. Finch didn't rush. He walked calmly to Jordan's side, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Jordan, are you all right?" he asked, his voice a soothing baritone. "I'm fine, Mr. Finch," Jordan replied. "Just a slight delay." Brenda scoffed. "He's more than delayed. He's about to be arrested. And you," she said, eyeing Mr. Finch's expensive attire, "should choose your company more wisely." Frank Miller completely ignored Brenda. His entire focus, and the focus of the 2 officers with him, was now on the scene in front of him. But he wasn't looking at Jordan as a perpetrator. He was looking at him as if he were trying to solve a complex equation. His earpiece had been buzzing non-stop for the last 90 seconds, ever since Samuel Finch had made a single explosive phone call from the first-class lounge. The call had not been to airport security. It had been to Genevieve Dubois, the newly appointed CEO of Pinnacle Airlines, a CEO who was at that very moment likely having a full-blown corporate aneurysm. The message that had been relayed down the chain of command to Frank Miller was not a request. It was a categorical, panic-laced order. "Brenda Scanlon, is it?" Frank Miller finally spoke, his voice a low gravel. He had read her name tag. Brenda preened. "Yes, it is. Lead agent. 20 years with the airline." She was proud of her tenure, viewing it as a shield. 20 years, Miller repeated slowly, the words hanging in the air. He then turned his back on her, a gesture of such profound dismissal that it was like a physical slap. He faced Jordan Banks directly. The entire gate area held its breath. This was the moment of judgment. The security chief was about to read the young man the riot act, to tell him to surrender peacefully. What happened next defied all expectation. Frank Miller, the formidable head of airport security, looked at the 18-year-old in the cashmere hoodie and did something no one could have predicted. He apologized. "Mr. Banks," he said, his voice now devoid of any hardness, replaced by a tone of deep, urgent sincerity. "On behalf of St. Augustine International Airport Security, I want to offer my most profound apologies for this unacceptable situation." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a deep, ringing void filled with the sound of 24 jaws hitting the floor. Brenda Scanlon's face, which had been a mask of smug victory, froze, the expression curdling into utter disbelief. "Mr. Banks," she stammered, her voice a weak, confused squeak. Miller did not even grant her a glance. He kept his focus entirely on Jordan. "We received a call from the CEO's office. There has been a catastrophic misunderstanding. This employee's behavior is inexcusable." He then turned to his officers. "Escort Mr. Banks to the first-class lounge immediately. See to it that he and Mr. Finch have anything they require. Anything at all." One of the officers, a young woman, stepped forward. "Sir," she said to Jordan, her voice full of respect. "If you'll come with us." Jordan nodded slowly, still holding the 2 pieces of his ticket. Brenda, however, was in a state of shock. Her reality had been shattered. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice rising to a shrill shriek. "He's the one who—" "Be quiet," Frank Miller commanded, turning to her with a look of such cold fury that she flinched backward. "You are to say nothing more. Do you understand me?" "But who is he?" Brenda whispered the question, a plea for understanding, a desperate attempt to make sense of her world turning upside down. It was Samuel Finch who answered. He stepped forward, his calm demeanor making his words all the more devastating. He looked at Brenda, then at the assembled crowd of passengers who were now filming with undisguised glee. "This, Mr. Finch," said his voice, clear and precise, "is Jordan A. Banks. A for Arthur. He is Arthur Banks's grandson and his designated heir." He let that sink in for a moment before delivering the final catastrophic blow. As of the reading of Arthur Banks's will 2 months ago, Jordan Banks is the new majority shareholder and chairman of the board of Pinnacle Airlines. You haven't just insulted a first-class passenger, Ms. Scanlon. You have assaulted the new owner of the company you work for. The revelation detonated in the sterile air of Gate C-37 with the force of a sonic boom. Chairman of the board, majority shareholder, owner. The words echoed in the profound silence, ricocheting off the faces of the stunned passengers and landing on Brenda Scanlon like physical blows. Her face went through a rapid, horrifying transformation. The smug certainty drained away, replaced by a wave of confusion, then dawning horror, and finally a sickly pale terror. Her mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. The entire universe she had inhabited. A universe where she held power, where she could pass judgment, where she was the gatekeeper, had just collapsed into a black hole of her own making. She looked at Jordan, truly looked at him for the first time. She didn't see a thug in a hoodie anymore. She saw the expensive, understated quality of the cashmere. She saw the quiet, unwavering confidence in his eyes, which she had mistaken for arrogance. She saw the weight of a legacy she couldn't possibly comprehend. She saw the man who signed the paychecks of the CEO, who signed the paychecks of the vice president, who signed the paychecks of her regional manager. She had torn up the ticket of God. "No," she whispered. It was a pathetic, desperate sound. "No, that's impossible. He's just a kid." "He is the man who owns your contract of employment, Ms. Scanlon." Mr. Finch corrected her coldly. "A contract which I imagine is about to be terminated, with cause." Frank Miller, the security chief, gestured again to his officers. "Get him out of this circus," he ordered, his voice laced with disgust for the scene Brenda had created. As the female officer gently guided Jordan and Mr. Finch away from the gate towards the private sanctuary of the lounge, the passengers erupted. The stunned silence broke into a cacophony of whispers, gasps, and the furious clicking of phone cameras. The story was already taking shape, the narrative solidifying into a viral legend. Brenda's legs seemed to give way. She stumbled back against the counter, her hand flying to her chest. I didn't know," she stammered, looking wildly at Frank Miller, pleading with her eyes. "How could I have known he was dressed? I was just following procedure." "Procedure?" Miller shot back, his voice dangerously low. "Was it procedure to publicly humiliate a passenger? Was it procedure to make thinly veiled racist remarks about profiles? Was it procedure, Miss Scanlon, to physically destroy company property and a passenger's legal travel document? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you abandoned procedure 20 minutes ago in favor of a personal power trip." Every word was a nail in the coffin of her career. "I need my job," she whimpered, tears beginning to stream down her face, carving paths through her foundation. "I have a mortgage. I've been here for 20 years. You should have thought of that before you appointed yourself judge, jury, and executioner." Miller said, his face a granite mask of contempt. He turned to the other gate agent, the young man who had watched the entire exchange with a look of growing horror. "What's your name?" "Peter, sir. Peter Riley," the young man said, his voice trembling. "Peter, you will take over this gate. Get these passengers boarded immediately. Apologize for the delay. Pinnacle Airlines will be issuing a statement and likely compensation for everyone," Miller commanded. He then turned to the second security officer. "Escort Ms. Scanlon to the Employee Services Office. She is to be relieved of her ID, her uniform, and her duties, effective immediately. She is not to touch the computer system. She is not to speak to any other employees. She is to wait there until a representative from corporate HR arrives to oversee her exit from the premises." The finality of the order was brutal. Brenda was no longer an employee. She was a liability to be managed and removed. The officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, please come with me." Brenda let out a strangled sob. The rage was gone, replaced by a pathetic, desperate panic. "Please," she begged, looking not at the officer, but in the direction Jordan had disappeared. "Let me talk to him. I can apologize. I can explain." "I think," Frank Miller said, his voice cold as ice, "that Mr. Banks has heard quite enough from you for one day. For a lifetime, in fact." As the officer firmly took her arm, Brenda's composure shattered completely. The carefully constructed facade of the officious, powerful gate agent crumbled, revealing the terrified, bitter woman beneath. She began to weep uncontrollably, her body shaking with convulsive sobs. The public humiliation she had tried to inflict on Jordan had boomeranged back with devastating force. She was now the spectacle. She was the one being judged by a jury of her peers, their phones held high, recording her complete and utter unraveling for the world to see. The last thing the passengers of Flight 815 saw of Brenda Scanlon was not a figure of authority, but a broken woman being led away, her cries echoing in a terminal that had suddenly become her personal chamber of judgment. The Pinnacle Airlines first-class lounge was an oasis of hushed tones and polished mahogany, a world away from the chaotic spectacle at Gate C-37. Jordan sank into a plush leather armchair, the two torn pieces of his boarding pass still clutched in his hand. Mr. Finch sat opposite him, a cup of black coffee already waiting for him on the table. Jordan stared at the ragged edges of the paper. He felt a strange emptiness. There was no sense of victory, no thrill of vindication. Only a profound sadness for the ugliness of the encounter, and a heavy sense of the responsibility that now rested squarely on his shoulders. The lounge door opened, and a woman entered, moving with the brisk, harried energy of someone in full-blown damage control mode. She was in her 50s, impeccably dressed, her face pale with stress. This was Genevieve Dubois, the CEO of Pinnacle Airlines. She had been personally selected by Arthur Banks to run the company. She strode directly to Jordan, her eyes wide with apology and alarm. "Mr. Banks." "Jordan," she began, her voice strained. "I came as soon as I heard. I am horrified. There are no words to express how sorry I am for what you just endured. It is an utter failure on every conceivable level." "It was unpleasant," Jordan said, his voice quiet. "Unpleasant." "It was a corporate nightmare," she corrected him. "It was the antithesis of everything your grandfather wanted this airline to be. It was everything I have been tasked to prevent." She sat down, looking exhausted. "Frank Miller has already had her removed. Legal is drafting the termination papers. The social media team is in DEFCON 1. Videos of the incident are already spreading like wildfire. Pinnacle Airlines and #gatekeeper Brenda are trending." Jordan winced. He hadn't wanted a public crucifixion. He had wanted to get on a plane. "What happens to her now?" he asked. "She'll be fired, of course," Ms. Dubois said immediately. "Blacklisted. With this much video evidence, she'll never work in customer service, let alone the airline industry again. We'll offer her a standard severance if she signs an ironclad non-disclosure agreement, but honestly, she has no leverage." Mr. Finch cleared his throat. "Jordan, it is not your concern to worry about her. She made her bed with prejudice and disrespect. She must now lie in it." Jordan nodded, but he was thinking beyond one woman's fate. "She's a symptom, not the disease," he said, looking at Ms. Dubois. She felt comfortable doing that. She felt empowered. That means the culture is wrong. The training is wrong. The oversight is wrong. Genevieve Dubois looked at him with a new level of respect. He wasn't a teenager throwing a tantrum. He wasn't a rich kid demanding a head on a platter. He was his grandfather's grandson, looking at the root of a systemic problem. "You are absolutely right," she said, "and I take full responsibility. It's my failure." "It's our failure," Jordan corrected her gently. "And it's our job to fix it. My grandfather bought this airline to restore dignity to travel. That was his mission. It's now my mandate." He placed the two halves of the ticket on the table between them. "I don't want to just fire one person," he said, his voice gaining strength, the authority of his new position settling upon him. "I want to use this. I want to turn this disgusting moment into the catalyst for real change. I want a complete overhaul of our customer service training from the ground up. I want a new program focused on de-escalation, unconscious bias, and cultural sensitivity. I want every single Pinnacle employee, from the baggage handlers to the pilots to the lead gate agents, to go through it. He leaned forward, his eyes burning with a passion she had only ever seen in his grandfather. And I want to name it. We'll call it the Arthur Banks Initiative for Equity and Service. Every new employee will learn about this incident. They will watch the video of what happened to me at Gate C-37. They will learn that at Pinnacle Airlines, dignity is not a suggestion. It's a non-negotiable requirement of the job. They will learn that the name on the ticket, the color of the skin, and the clothes on their back are irrelevant. The only thing that matters is the human being standing in front of them. Ms. Dubois and Mr. Finch were speechless. In the span of an hour, Jordan Banks had gone from being the victim of a petty abuse of power to a leader setting a bold new course for a multi-billion-dollar corporation. He wasn't just reacting to a problem. He was forging a new identity for the company from its ashes. "The board meeting in Zurich can wait," Jordan declared. "We'll do it via video conference. My first act as chairman is to fix my own house. Get the department heads on a call. We start now." Ms. Dubois nodded, a slow smile spreading across her face. The panic was gone, replaced by a surge of inspiration. "Yes, Mr. Chairman," she said, the title feeling natural for the first time. "Consider it done." Jordan finally sat back, the tension leaving his shoulders. He had found his purpose. This was why his grandfather had trusted him, not just to run a company, but to lead it, to make it better. The torn ticket on the table was no longer a symbol of his humiliation. It was the foundation stone of his legacy. 3 months passed. The seasons changed, but the digital ghost of Brenda Scanlon's career-ending meltdown at Gate C-37 remained eternal. The videos, filmed from a dozen different angles, had been viewed over 150 million times across all platforms. She had become a meme, a cautionary tale, a verb. To pull a Brenda was to self-destruct with such spectacular bigoted arrogance that there was no coming back. For Jordan Banks, those 3 months were a whirlwind of action. The Arthur Banks Initiative for Equity and Service was rolled out with incredible speed. It was not a fluffy HR exercise. It was an intense, immersive program, developed with leading sociologists and customer experience experts. Every employee was required to complete it. The training used the actual footage from Gate C-37 as its central case study, a raw, unflinching look at how prejudice and a lack of empathy could destroy a customer's trust and an employee's life in under 10 minutes. Jordan personally addressed the first few training sessions via video link. He spoke not as a victim seeking pity, but as a leader explaining the company's core values. His story gave the initiative a power and authenticity that no corporate memo ever could. The response from employees was overwhelmingly positive. Most were appalled by Brenda's actions and embraced the new focus on dignity and respect. Pinnacle Airlines, once a company in crisis, was now being lauded in the business press for its transparent and transformative response. Bookings after an initial dip soared to record highs. For Brenda Scanlon, however, the karma was not a lesson in corporate transformation. It was a slow, grinding, and deeply personal demolition. Her termination was swift and brutal. The viral nature of the incident meant that the non-disclosure agreement she was offered came with a pittance of a severance package. She refused to sign it, deluding herself into thinking she could sue for wrongful termination. Her lawyer took her initial consultation fee, and then, after watching the videos, gently explained that she had no case. In fact, he advised her that Pinnacle could probably sue her for damages to their brand. She was a pariah. Her face was recognized everywhere she went. In the grocery store, she would hear people whisper, "That's her. That's gatekeeper Brenda." She tried to get a job at a department store, but the hiring manager recognized her instantly. "I'm sorry," he'd said, unable to meet her eye. "We just can't." Her friends, many of whom were also service industry workers, distanced themselves. They were embarrassed by her actions and terrified of the association. Her social media was a toxic wasteland of hateful comments and threats. She had to delete all her accounts effectively, erasing herself from the digital world. The financial collapse was inevitable. Without a job, she drained her savings. She missed a mortgage payment, then a second. The bank was unsympathetic. The foreclosure notice arrived on a Tuesday, a crisp official document that felt as final as the tearing of that boarding pass. One rainy afternoon, as she was packing the last of her belongings into cardboard boxes, a news report came on the small television she still had. It was a segment on America's most inspiring young leaders. And there he was, Jordan Banks. He was being interviewed about the astonishing turnaround at Pinnacle Airlines. "It all started," Jordan said to the reporter, his face calm and confident, "with a difficult experience that taught us a valuable lesson. It taught us that a company's greatest asset isn't its planes or its routes, but its integrity. We learned that every single interaction matters, and that treating people with dignity isn't just a good idea, it's the only way to do business." Brenda sank onto a box, the packing tape dispenser, slipping from her hand. She watched the man, the boy she had tried to humiliate, now being celebrated as a visionary. He had taken the ugly scene she created and had spun it into gold for himself and for his company. He had used the moment to build a legacy. She had used it to become a nobody. Her tears started to fall, silent, bitter drops of regret. She hadn't just lost her job or her house. She had lost her place in the world. And the most painful part, the hard karma that would haunt her for the rest of her days, was the simple, undeniable truth that echoed in the empty rooms of her foreclosed home. She had done it all to herself. She had held all the power in her hands, and with one sharp, satisfying rip, she had torn her own life to shreds. In the end, this isn't just a story about a racist gate agent getting what she deserved. It's a powerful reminder that our actions, especially those driven by prejudice and a thirst for petty power, have consequences that can ripple out in ways we can never predict. Brenda Scanlon thought she was putting a young man in his place. What she was really doing was authoring her own downfall. On the other side of the coin, Jordan Banks was faced with a moment of intense humiliation, but he chose to react not with rage, but with purpose. He transformed a personal wound into a catalyst for positive systemic change, proving that true power isn't about controlling others. It's about uplifting them. This story shows us that karma isn't just a mystical force. It's the logical outcome of the choices we make, the respect we give, and the dignity we either uphold or destroy. If this story of karmic justice and inspiring leadership resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see that doing the right thing and standing up to the wrong thing truly matters. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true stories of consequences, character, and the incredible twists of real life. Thank you for listening.